Now, a story that, or a person who's had great influence over me and perhaps over many people here is a woman by the name of Joyce Meyer. And I've listened to her preach many times, particularly in Hillsong conferences through the years, and listened to her podcasts and read her books and been inspired by her powerful ministry. Now, I'd never really had listened to her testimony before until not too long ago. I thought I'd have a listen to her testimony on YouTube. If you haven't done it, I encourage you to do it. Just have a box of tissues handy when you listen to it. But when I listened to her testimony, I cried through it. I was gobsmacked. I couldn't believe what she'd been through in her life. Right from childhood, she was systematically, physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually abused by her father. Raped over 200 times in her teenage years, just by her own father. What a horrible situation to go through. And of course, growing up thinking, what is wrong with me? All of the time, why do I deserve this happening to me? And you could imagine someone who's been through that, their life ending up on a course that just ends in total disaster. But of course, God got a hold of her life, and she yielded her life to God, and God worked in her and healed her and has raised her up to become an incredible voice around the nations today, one of the most sought after and influential preachers on the planet today. She's married with, about 50 years, got 4 children in the ministry. And now, when I was listening to her testimony, one thing really struck me, and she said it took a long time for me to come to this place to be able to say, looking back on my life, I'm glad that it all happened. You've really got somewhere when you're able to do that, eh? When you're able to look at the tragedy, you're able to look at the mess, you're able to look at the pain, the things that perhaps you've not even ever been able to share with some people, but you're able to say, I'm glad that that happened. Because she went on to say this, what the devil meant for evil, God has used for good. And that's the incredible thing. When you see the big picture, where you see the way God works in all of this to bring out great things. One of my favorite stories in the Bible, and in fact, my life has kind of followed his journey a little bit, and it's been prophesied over my life, the life of Joseph, found in Genesis chapter 50. This is where we come to the climax anyway. Joseph was a young son in his family, favored by his dad, and his brothers were jealous of him. And in fact, they wanted to kill him. When he came out to see them one day in the fields, they plotted to murder Joseph. If it wasn't for one brother who, he was put into a hole in the ground for a little while, and then some slave traders came, they decided they'd sell him to the slave traders to get rid of him, and he was taken off to Egypt. They took his coat of many colors that his father had given him and kind of ripped it up and put blood on it and took it back to the dad and said a wild animal must have killed him. And of course his dad grieved over the loss of Joseph, but here was Joseph taken to Egypt, sold into slavery. And he spent years serving in slavery. He was faithful in that place, and because he had the gift of God in his life, God began to raise him up in a place of influence, even in the house in which he was a slave. Until he was falsely accused because of his righteousness. He was falsely accused and then thrown in prison. And he spent years in prison. And it's kind of like things seem to go from worse to worse, bad to worse. And it's not a good predicament he's in right there, in prison for years. But the gift of God that's within him and his attitude and everything just caused him to rise to the surface again and to have a positive influence in that place. Until ultimately, he interpreted the dream of a couple of guys that came into the prison. One was executed, one went back to Pharaoh's court, and one day when Pharaoh had a dream, they remembered Joseph in the prison. And Joseph was brought to interpret a dream for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh saw the wisdom of God in Joseph, and in one day, Joseph was taken from prison and raised up to Pharaoh's court. And it just blows my mind at how that can happen, how God can take our lives from a seeming big disaster or from a seeming dead-end track, and he can lift us up and he can put us in a place of incredible influence. See, I believe that God has put amazing things in each one of us. See, what Joseph said there in Genesis chapter 5, verse 20, is that when his brothers came, they eventually came to Egypt, because here was Joseph. He was ruling the nation under the Pharaoh, basically coordinating and administrating the whole nation and the sharing of the food during a time of famine. And when his brothers all came to that nation, he was, for a while, he played a little game with them because he wasn't ready to reveal himself. But eventually, when he did, he said this to his brothers: "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." That's the big picture. See, it's not about us. It's about what God does through us. When we yield our lives to God, He takes our lives. Sometimes we go through some crazy stuff, but coming out the other side, He enriches us, He matures us, and He brings us into a place where we're able to be an instrument in His hand to save many lives, to touch many lives in a powerful way. See, God has put goodness and He's put greatness inside of you. And God will bring that out of you to bless the world around about you. Amen? And and if we just hold on to God right throughout our life and knowing that He's got a plan for us, we hold on to Him, and we sometimes go through these difficult times, and we pop out the other side. We fulfill the plan, the purpose God has got for us, and every one of us can have a confidence that one day we are going to stand before God, and He's going to say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's Matthew 25:21. He will say this to you: "You are a good and faithful servant." Just hang in there, and you'll see all the good come out of it and God's glory in your life. Amen?